quite frankly, unfair and has nothing to do with what was going on in Arizona. All right? What Arizona was dealing with or trying to deal with was a huge problem for them, both from an economic standpoint and a safety standpoint. What do I mean by that? Well, the number of illegal aliens is estimated to be anywhere between 460,000 and 500,000 people. What does that cost Arizona every year? Well, the estimated cost of that was $2.6 billion a year that the taxpayers of that state pay for illegal aliens in terms of medical costs, education, and incarceration. The cost to the United States of that every year is about $113 billion, of which states and localities absorb about $84 billion. In fact, New Jersey, the estimate here is there are about 370,000 illegal aliens. The costs to New Jersey are about $2.1 billion a year for education, medical costs, and incarceration. I think the 2009-2010 budget deficit was at about $2 billion. If you erase the cost spent for illegal aliens, it would have erased New Jersey's budget deficit. What about crime? Arizona was dealing with the fact that half of all illegal border crossings coming into the United States were in Arizona. Phoenix and Tucson are major transshipment points for cocaine and other drugs. And in 2007 alone, 11% of its prison population were Mexican nationals. 22% of the illegal aliens sentenced in Maricopa County, which is one of the biggest counties, were convicted of felonies. 10.5% of those sentences were for murder or manslaughter. And illegal aliens were found to be responsible for almost 17% of all violent crime in the county. Now, for those who think that state and local governments should not be checking the immigration status of individuals, I want to finish with two true stories that show the consequences of not doing that. In 2001, at 12:09 a.m., a state trooper in Maryland stopped an individual for speeding on Interstate 95. His name was Ziad Jara. He had entered as a tourist, then became a student without changing his immigration status, and then he overstayed his tourist visa. He was deportable almost from the first moment he came into the United States. However, the Maryland state trooper didn't ask him any questions about his immigration status, didn't call the 24-hour ICE hotline, which he could have easily done. If he had, they would have told him he was in the United States illegally and he could have detained him. No, instead the Maryland trooper simply gave him a speeding ticket and let him go on his way. That ticket was found in his glove compartment at Newark Airport 2 days later, after he flew United Airlines Flight 93 into the ground in Pennsylvania. That was not an isolated case. In 2001, in April, another individual named Nawaf Al-Azami was stopped by Oklahoma police for speeding. If police had checked with the Law Enforcement Support Center, they would have been told he was in the U.S. illegally and he could have been detained. Instead, he was issued a speeding ticket and he was let go on his way. He helped crash American Airlines Flight 77 into the Pentagon. So those are some of the economic and other consequences of not enforcing our federal immigration laws and not checking the immigration status of people who are arrested.
Thank you very much, Hans. We will now move to our rebuttal period. In the interest of time, to provide more time for question and answer period, I'd like to shorten the rebuttal period to 5 minutes per participant.
I agree with you.
Great.
Just so first, overall, I didn't hear any constitutional argument, so there's nothing I can respond to. As I say, I just think everything interesting about the Arizona statute has been to the Supreme Court already. It's not something the state is allowed to adopt in the federal system, as Judge Bolton holds. On the statute itself, Mr. Spakovsky added a word "other" that doesn't appear in the statute. You have to read this section together with the new state crimes created by the Arizona statute. The statute creates new Arizona state crimes not found in the federal code of not having your ID, not presenting your ID to a government, stopping for work, stopping to pick up work. So I'm oversimplifying for reasons of time. But you can go through, it creates a whole series of new state crimes. So there's no other here. The 1-2 punch is that the law enforcement officials in Arizona have to enforce these new Arizona crimes, which include the crime of looking for work on the street. And then when they stop someone for the crime, they have no discretion, they must check the immigration status. So there is no other there. There's no two steps. It is true, yes, it is true that there is a federal center which exists to, when a state and local government asks for a check of immigration status, the Fed have to respond. That was very crucial to Judge Bolton's holding in joining this, the fact that they have to respond. That doesn't save the statute. That's what made it fatal. She had testimony from the director of that center saying they were not set up to respond to a response to a request for a status check from every stop, not just arrest, mind you, every stop, detention, or arrest for any purpose, including these new state laws. So that was not ignored in the legislation. That was one of the things that made it beyond the state's power to adopt. And finally, it's important to understand the criminal-civil distinction when it comes to federal immigration law, however slippery, okay? Being out of status is not a federal crime. The Supreme Court's referred to this over and over again. If it were a federal crime to be out of status, then the government, before deporting you, would have to prove its allegations beyond a reasonable doubt. They'd have to provide you a lawyer. They'd have to give you the full suite of due process rights. And they don't do any of these things. And the Supreme Court held consistently, beginning in one of the first of those Chinese exclusion cases, that immigration violations are civil violations. If they were criminal violations, they'd have to do a whole lot of things that they don't do. So it is true, for constitutional reasons that really never been well established but not particularly well explained, that state and local police are thought to have concurrent responsibility to arrest for federal crimes. But they do not have concurrent responsibility to arrest for federal civil violations, labor violations, regulatory violations of various kinds. And that's an important distinction, and that's why this steps over the line. Of course, Arizona state and local officials can cooperate with federal officials, or on their own can investigate federal crimes, drugs. Of course they should. But what takes this over the line is that they're creating new state crimes, a crime of immigration violations that are not crimes under federal law. They then direct their police to stop and arrest for those crimes. Right? And then in the process of doing that, that's the mandatory status check, together with the direction that they have to enforce the immigration laws to the max. If they don't, then citizens can sue them. It's the whole combination that's fatal. We can take out some isolated parts of it and make it more plausible if we like. The only thing I'll say about the last, as I said, I did want to come to talking about the costs of immigration and the policies on immigration. I really was trying to speak even to those who were with Mr. Spakovsky at the end of his talk and think that undocumented alienation, undocumented migration is a serious problem. And I just want to convince you that it's a federal problem and it's not something the states have anything to do with. That's a world in which undocumented migrants don't work, they don't generate taxes, they don't look after people's children, and the whole economic picture is very much more complicated than he painted. And I perfectly agree that INS's inability to keep track of people who come in on student visas and never show up for classes is a disgrace. Congress is right to be outraged about that. But at a constitutional level, it's a very funny argument for the conservatives. When I was in law school, the liberals on the faculty were these old New Dealers who said, if there's a problem, the government should fix it. Right? If we're at war, President Truman can seize the steel mills. What's your problem with that? And it was the conservatives, like my classmate Sam Alito, who used to say, there are right ways and wrong ways of doing things. And just because the need is great doesn't give any president, including Truman, the right to ignore constitutional procedures. And I think that's a very powerful conservative contribution to American legal discourse, and I would be very, very sorry if the conservatives too began to take the position that the end always justifies the means.
I was not saying the end justifies the means. I was trying to give the background that caused Arizona to act. I'm sorry, but the 4th, 5th, 8th, 9th, and 10th circuits have all recognized the inherent authority of local law enforcement to make arrests for immigration violations. Not only that, but the Justice Department, Office of Legal Counsel, issued an opinion several years ago recognizing that authority. So the Justice Department basically had to, in filing this lawsuit, say, well, just don't pay any attention to that memo we issued a couple of years ago. Okay? This law is not unconstitutional. It falls within the concurrent enforcement powers of the states. I should say, by the way, I didn't even mention this, but to show you how grasping the Justice Department was in trying to come up with some reasons to go against this law. We're talking about the federal preemption argument because that's what the judge focused on. But if you want to actually read something that's kind of amusing, pull the opinion and read the judge's dismissal of the Commerce Clause claims that were made by the Obama administration. If you all can believe it, they actually put in a claim that said, well, this Arizona law violates the Commerce Clause because it interferes with interstate commerce. And you're going, how could this interfere with interstate commerce? Well, because the intent of the law was to deter illegal aliens from coming into Arizona, and that was an interference with interstate commerce. So people who are here illegally, who are not entitled to the United States, if you do something to deter them from coming into your state, you're interfering with interstate commerce. I mean, the judge just dismissed this, but it shows the overall, real weakness of this case, and given the other court decisions, including from the Supreme Court, on the ability of local law enforcement to make arrests for immigration violations and to detain illegal aliens, I mean, I just don't see how Judge Bolton's decision is going to be upheld in the courts of appeal.
Now Kenny Wagner will direct questions and answers. In your questions, please be brief and specific, and please limit yourself to one question per turn.
Volunteers?
Should I stand?
Sure.
Please stand and just state your name and class here or whatever.
Ryan Oskowski, I'm curious. About half of Professor Thomas's temporal class is here, so I'd like to just tack on something a couple of us talking about after. General cert procedure law for parties. The trend to the right is basically take discretion away from police. So if they're roaming for people with outdated licenses, they can't just pick at different cars and say, we're stopping people because we think you might have an outdated license. Here, it looks like they're giving discretion to the police and they have a reasonable whatever. Within general Fourth Amendment law, how can you reconcile this? They can have a pretextual stop or whatever. There's a lawful stop, I get that. But there seems to be throwing discretion back to the police, which the Supreme Court has held is unconstitutional as far as that kind of thing.
Well, I don't agree with that. Look, there's lots and lots of law on when police can make a lawful arrest. Okay, when something is pretextual and is therefore, a violation of due process and otherwise. So this idea, and there's, there's probably 800 cases on reasonable suspicion. I mean, there's so many because that has come up countless times, and the courts have done, a very extensive job of laying out what constitutes reasonable suspicion and what does not. So all of the language that's used in here is all language that has been previously defined and previously laid out by the courts. And this idea that you're somehow doing something unlawful, the state of Arizona is doing something unlawful by using this kind of language, I just